Hello and welcome. Today we'll be covering the evolution of wireless communication.
The shortcomings it has encountered.
And how it has influenced American societies.
Let's start with the theory of wireless communication. Heinrich Hertz, a German scientist, wanted to test the concept of electromagnetic frequencies, which at the time was a long running theory that consisted of the work of several scientists. He created a device that would produce a spark on command, which is designated as a transmitter, and a few yards away lay a similar device with a spark gap acting as the receiver.
His objective was to prove the findings of James Clerk Maxwell, another scientist who had previously worked on electromagnetic fields as a concept. The spark had to produce some form of radiation that could then ignite the smaller spark that was stationed further away to prove his theory correct. When Hertz ran the experiment, he observed a small amount of energy had reached the receiver, proving the existence of electromagnetic frequencies.
Hertz would pass away before being able to utilize these newly discovered frequencies dubbed Hertz. His work wouldn't go unnoticed, however, as people now saw wireless communication as not just a possibility, but an inevitability.
7 years after his death, a young Guglielmo Marconi would stumble upon Hertz's findings through a newspaper and was intrigued. He sought to replicate his experiment, but after the university declined to support him, he used part of his parents' house instead.
Marconi's design featured a few key differences compared to Hertz's. It used a curved reflector to direct a stronger frequency towards the receiver, which itself was improved upon to be more sensitive. The signal broadcasted would be in Morse code, which was already being utilized in wired telegraphs. The device worked as intended, broadcasting 3 dots that read as the letter S.
Marconi had proved that his design was functional, but it did have one drawback at first. Range. The electromagnetic waves broadcasted were fast but not concentrated, making it difficult for a receiver to function outside 30 feet. Marconi fixed this by using a nickel-silver mixture to improve the sensitivity of the receiver, and would later discover that having the transmitter placed higher than the receiver helped increase the range. This would eventually lead to the creation of signal towers, which are still in use today.
On December 12, 1901, Marconi's work reached a new milestone when his telegraph technology transmitted a wireless transatlantic signal from Cornwall, England to Signal Hill in St. John's, Newfoundland. Marconi used a kite to hold the receiving antenna and raised it to receive a signal across 2,200 miles or 3,500 kilometers over the Atlantic Ocean, once again containing the letter S.
On January 19, 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt and King Edward VII greeted each other via wireless messages in Morse, reflecting the original milestone of the transatlantic telegraph connecting the Old World to the New World. When the Titanic sank in 1912, it was the wireless telegraph that allowed the ship to send an SOS distress signal before sinking. Businesses expressed great interest in the telegraph as it gave them the ability to easily communicate with customers, suppliers, investors, and other financial experts/assets.
There was an account of a customer who was on the Olympic using their telegraph to order some socks from a nearby store as a prank, and a biplane swooped over the deck and delivered their goods. While this story could be a myth, the implication was that the wireless telegraph managed to link together the airplane and the cruise liner, all marvels of technology at the time.
The success and widespread popularity of Marconi's telegraph brings us to the next evolution, an idea that was ahead of its time: pocket wireless. This is a brief era of speculation, with some designs seeing official use, but it died off soon as they couldn't maintain relevancy.
Going back to Marconi's telegraph, it was evident that the already established infrastructure to support wireless telegraphs was now obsolete. Arthur V. Abbott predicted the shift of long-distance communication from long telephone lines that obstructed every street in the country to the average person being outfitted with a wireless telegraph.
However, Marconi's design was not perfect. According to countless criticism received by journalists at the time, people desired to communicate on the move, not just from their homes.
It became a trend to outfit yourself in wires and curious devices, dubbed the boy genius archetype. People fumbling around their pockets were now associated with them receiving a message from someone or somewhere.
This system functioned like Marconi's telegraph, with the difference being that the receiver was now mobile. However, the transmitter had to remain at a fixed location, meaning that the role of the transmitter and the receiver was actually very gendered. It also needed something to ground itself, such as a light pole or a car. and most of these pocket wireless systems were accompanied by the user holding a metal-tipped cane or boots with steel bottoms to ground the system.
This made the system oddly cumbersome to use as you needed to coordinate with the transmitter on what time you wanted to receive or transmit a message. Light poles were abundant, but they weren't everywhere in cities, even less in rural towns.
The combination of these systems would lead to the failure of pocket wireless, leaving it a myth appropriate for fiction and something that didn't need to exist at the time. There was very little practicality to communicating on the move unless you operated heavy machinery or vehicles, such as boats, which already had their telegraph systems installed on board.
From this system, we now jump into Edwin Armstrong's FM radio. It was revolutionary in its ability to transmit signals on multiple frequencies, extending the availability of radio stations as multiple could be hosted simultaneously across different channels. By the time the FM radio was created, sound was now possible to be transmitted and had existed for around 30 years. The first sound broadcast was made by Reginald Fessenden in 1906 in Brant Rock, Massachusetts.
Edwin Armstrong had previously worked on wireless technology in the 1900s, but this new system was different. Instead of altering the power, it altered the frequency of the radio signal, giving it a much wider coverage. The FM system also consumed less power while providing it much more clarity, although its range was much more limited compared to AM radio.
Armstrong's first challenge was trying to secure his patent, as another scientist had filed a system called the ultradion circuit, which functions similarly to FM radio. For over a decade, Armstrong was in the courts arguing his case but ultimately lost. After review from two technical juries in 1942, they changed their opinion and awarded Armstrong the Franklin Medal.
His troubles didn't end there. However, in 1940, the FCC awarded FM radio the same frequencies as experimental television and ordered the construction and installation of FM infrastructures to support the new initiative. After World War II, the FCC made a strange decision to raise the frequency bands and lower the available power to radio stations. While FM radio required less power, the cut in available power lowered the range to around a small city level, not to mention the increased frequencies that now rendered commercial-grade receivers and transmitters obsolete.
The FM initiative was later abandoned shortly after Armstrong's death, partly due to the failure of the system to replace AM radio. It would later be picked up again and used up until the modern day, but FM and AM systems would instead coexist in the radio world. The next system we will talk about is the television. It was the first system that allowed the transmitting and receiving of images and film to the American household without the need for a projector. The development of television and FM radio took place around the same time, so a lot of their history is intertwined.
Two men who are commonly credited with the technological invention of electronic television are Philo Farnsworth and Vladimir K. Zworykin.
Philo Farnsworth was an American inventor who made significant contributions to the invention of the electronic television. However, Farnsworth worked independently from any corporations, unlike most of the other inventors of his time. Another difference that set Farnsworth apart was how young he was. In 1922, Farnsworth imagined his concept of the electronic television before he even turned 15 while living on a farm in Idaho. By the age of 15, he had envisioned and developed a complete design.
In 1926, Farnsworth moved to California and set out to physically invent his developments. Like Zworykin, Farnsworth invented his version of a photoelectric camera tube, which he called the image dissector. On September 7, 1927, Farnsworth's image dissector successfully transmitted an image. A year later, Farnsworth publicly demonstrated his invention. The image dissector was able to transmit a motion picture of 100 to 150 line definition at a frequency of 30 pictures per second.
Vladimir K. Zworykin was a Russian electrical engineer who came to America during his career. In 1928, Zworykin produced his own practical camera tube that could be utilized for television transmittal, which he called the iconoscope. Zworykin's iconoscope was the first practical video camera tube that was used in television cameras. Zworykin's work was immediately recognized as a great advancement in electronic television, and it gained support from David Sarnoff, who led the Radio Corporation of America, otherwise known as the RCA.
Both the image dissector and iconoscope operated in a similar function and featured mechanical components to scan images and transmit them by cable to a screen. Both systems utilized a method in which light from the scanning beam created and temporarily stored an electrical charge as it struck the photocells, later releasing this charge to transmit images. Farnsworth's image dissector was invented first, but Zworykin's iconoscope featured a more complex design with more potential for further development.
In the early 30s, the work being done on television was expected to have passed the research phase and be brought to the commercial world as early as possible. However, Dr. Zworykin and his research associates decided that limited commercialization allowed for more rapid technical developments on the project. Early television stayed in development, and it was strongly incentivized for the researchers to improve on this technology throughout these years.
The innovation of the electronic television did not go without any struggle, however. Conflict arose in a legal dispute between Philo Farnsworth and RCA, resulting in a series of lawsuits and legal battles. Farnsworth claimed that RCA unlawfully used his patent. Farnsworth took action and was reimbursed financially, but the conflict took a toll on him and could be considered an overall loss. On the other hand, while RCA lost money, they eventually acquired a license to use Farnsworth's patent. This minimized the conflict's hindrance of the development of television.
The invention of the television proved to be highly impactful in American society. It provided a powerful medium that allowed for mass communication across a wide audience. This brought about great effects and benefits. Television transmitted wireless communication by allowing the transmission of sounds and images at once.
This potential was immediately realized by corporations such as RCA and AT&T, who utilized television to transmit news and other messages. Other impacts of the invention of television include innovations in education and entertainment. Films and educational video content was produced for television broadcasts across the nation. Of course, there are countless other applications of electronic television that can easily be seen in today's world.
That concludes our overview of the evolution of wireless communication in the early 20th century.
It should be noted that these systems are principles of the methods that are now used for communication in the modern day.
They have experienced a vast number of innovations since their debut, but the one defining aspect of wireless media is how they have influenced American societies, for better or for worse.
Through their flaws and imperfections, innovation was achieved which progressed humanity throughout the industrial age, kept the world informed during our world wars, and kept the people entertained during the Cold War.
It would also later inspire the internet, the massive hub that we use today.
None of this would have been possible without the sacrifices made by these scientists and inventors. Their contributions should not be understated in the slightest.